Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important discussion of the State Department's travel advisories and how they can help inform campus travel and safety plans for Americans. My name is Anthony Colaha, and I'm the Director of the Office of Global Educational Programs within the State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. In this role, I oversee efforts to attract qualified international students to the United States through our Education USA Global Advising Network, and to increase and diversify Americans taking part in study abroad through our USA Study Abroad programs and initiatives, which include the Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship Program, the Critical Language Scholarship Program, and the Capacity Building Program for U.S. Study Abroad, which is hosting this IDEAS webinar today as part of an ongoing series focused on helping U.S. higher education institutions prepare for a safe return to study abroad in the future. As our newly confirmed Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, stated in his Senate confirmation hearing, I believe we can and we will overcome the COVID crisis. We agree, and this seminar is part of our efforts to work with U.S. higher education to support existing and grow new study abroad opportunities for young Americans in a safe and responsible manner. Over the past months, my office has continued working hard through a variety of innovative means to keep our mission of engaging the people of the United States with the people of the world and the people of the world with the U.S. at the forefront of our agenda. We see enthusiasm from our American students who are more inspired and eager than ever to explore the world, and our programs are ready to respond when safety and travel restrictions allow us to do so. For instance, applications are now being accepted for our Gilman program for credit-bearing study programs starting this summer through next year. We also see enthusiasm from our foreign partners, with hundreds of viewers attending our Internationalization of Higher Education in the COVID-19 Era webinar series. This series, which focuses on raising awareness of the changing landscape of U.S. study abroad, will host its next webinar titled Championing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in International Education on February 9th. And finally, we see enthusiasm from our partners in U.S. higher education, with greater than ever interest in our IDEAS grants, which provide up to $35,000 to U.S. colleges and universities for projects to create, expand, or diversify their outbound study abroad programs and/or resources. The IDEAS grant competition is now accepting proposals through February 26th. And should you want to learn more about any of these opportunities, please visit our website at studyabroad.state.gov. I share these examples to highlight my office's commitment to resuming in-person study abroad programming for U.S. students, but we know that any efforts to do so must prioritize health and safety and do so in an ethical manner. That is why I am pleased today to be hosting our colleagues from the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs. Consular Affairs, or CA, is responsible for the welfare and protection of U.S. citizens abroad. Their highest priority is to protect the lives and interests of U.S. citizens overseas, which they do through routine and emergency services to Americans at our embassies and consulates around the world. CA also provides safety and security information for every country in the world through its travel advisories. The goal of today's webinar is for you to gain a greater understanding of the State Department's travel advisories and how they may inform your campus's discussions of when and how to safely resume U.S. study abroad programming. And to start this conversation, I am pleased to introduce Karen King, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Overseas Citizen Services in the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs. Previously, she served as Managing Director for Visa Services and Director of Public and Diplomatic Liaison, and has served overseas and domestically in a number of positions. Thank you for joining us. Over to Deputy Assistant Secretary King.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Hello, everybody. I am truly delighted to be able to speak with you today about the ways the Bureau of Consular Affairs can assist your students in staying informed and safe while overseas once the world health environment allows for a safe return to non-essential travel. Consular Affairs, as Anthony mentioned, is charged with the Department of State's highest priority, protecting the lives and serving the interests of U.S. citizens overseas. To this end, we document U.S. citizens born overseas and issue passports at our embassies and consulates. We visit U.S. citizens when they're arrested. We help families return injured and deceased loved ones to the United States. We evacuate U.S. citizens in crisis situations, and many of you were aware of our efforts in that regard last year when we assisted more than 100,000 U.S. citizens to come home after countries closed borders and airlines canceled flights with almost no notice in some cases. Perhaps most importantly, we make sure U.S. citizens, including students and universities, have the information they need to stay safe, which is what the team will be talking about today. I'd like to emphasize a few points before turning things over to the consular officers and subject matter experts who are here with us. First, let me say that when we began arranging this presentation, we were hoping the world would be in a different place in terms of COVID. Sadly, we're not there yet, so I know the pandemic is dominating all of your thoughts. I also, on a personal note, want to say I come to this issue not only as a government official, but also as a parent. I have two college students right now, a first year at Lewis and Clark and a junior at the College of Worcester. And my junior was very directly impacted by this. He's a Chinese studies major. He was planning to go to China last fall. That fell through. We then thought Taiwan might still work out for the semester we're in right now. That fell through when the US numbers started going up. I spent a lot of time working with the excellent student advisor at his college. At the end of the day, it just wasn't going to happen. So I know what your students are going through. I know what you're going through. I want to try to alleviate any uncertainty you have right now about the State Department's posture on international travel. Right now, we are advising U.S. citizens to defer non-essential travel. We're hopeful conditions will improve sooner rather than later, but the hard truth is that the world health situation right now is so dynamic, it's simply not conducive to travel. We've been even more assertive about this posture since CDC enacted a public health requirement that went into effect on Tuesday, mandating pre-departure COVID testing for all travelers to the United States, including US citizens. There are a couple of hurdles that test presents. One is actually getting the test, and we do think that worldwide tests are becoming more available by the day, both in cities and even at airports. But the second hurdle is that individuals are going to have to test negative in order to get on the plane. And that's a real question mark. Nobody knows, with the asymptomatic nature of this in many individuals, nobody really knows if they're going to test positive or negative until they take the test. And this means that people may have to spend an indefinite time frame overseas if they test positive until they test negative. So I will say that to the degree that anybody does still want to travel overseas right now or has to travel overseas right now, at minimum, they need to make sure they have insurance that covers COVID. And students should be prepared to stay beyond their anticipated departure date in case they test positive before they leave. So again, state, and we are taking our cue very heavily from CDC, recommend against overseas travel at this time. That said, facilitating overseas travel for US citizens is part of our core mission, and we are hopeful that with the rollout of vaccines and new testing regimes, the situation will be different by the start of the new academic year in the fall. Knowing that you plan ahead, this forum is a useful way to talk about what we can do for you and your student when it does become safe for travel and study abroad to restart. We continuously monitor local conditions around the world and update this information through our travel advisory program. Our embassies and consulates are also updating their country-specific COVID information pages often, sometimes daily. The rapidly changing nature of this information and of our travel advisories underscores the need for extreme caution. I want to emphasize that our travel advisories are fact and metrics based, reflecting input from our embassies on the ground, from our interagency partners, for example, CDC, and from host countries. It's important to note that our travel advisories are apolitical. And although what we say about traveling to a given country often has a real economic and political impact in terms of our relationship with the country, We don't factor that into our advice. We focus solely on assessing facts and transmitting them to the American public. We take changes to travel advisory levels very seriously because we know these updates, especially when we move the travel advisories up to higher levels, have implications for insurers and for your programs. We can't tell students or any US citizen what to do, but we often see the results when students in particular fail to heed our advice. We help where we can, but we can't fix everything. And so I know that many of you may be aware drug laws in many countries are stricter than here, especially we're seeing changes in state law now on marijuana and other substances. Those laws aren't necessarily relaxing in a lot of countries overseas. We also encounter young people when they engage in risky recreational activity in countries with poor oversight or response infrastructure. So a skiing accident in some countries will not result in Rocky Mountain Rescue coming like it would if you were in Colorado. So we're very prepared when those kinds of things are to help. I want to say very importantly for all students, especially again, since messaging is our most important tool, is to have them enroll in the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, STEP, which you can access through our website at travel.state.gov. Once you're enrolled in STEP, you say which country you're going to be in, and our embassy in that country pushes you emergency messages as needed. So in sum, I like you, I look forward to a day when international travel is easy and generally safe again. There will, of course, always be risks, and we will always be there to help US citizens, including students, in any way we possibly can. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to the team.
Well, let me thank you, Deputy Assistant Secretary King, for those remarks. Once again, we appreciate your team's dedication to protecting American citizens overseas, and we are absolutely grateful to be partnering with you today to host this important discussion. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan Patarini from the Bureau of Consular Affairs, who has agreed to moderate today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much, Gas King. Thank you both for your participation, for your framing of this important issue, these issues, and for sort of being with us today. I see we have over 600 participants on the call, which, as we were talking about earlier, I think represents a real opportunity for us to communicate and a real need for us to communicate to this important audience. So thanks everyone for being here today. I said when we were putting this event together, if I was going to serve as moderator, I want to be like a good referee. You won't see me, and so I really want to get to the expert panel that we have put together. My Consular Affairs colleagues and State Department colleagues that are joining us today. They are Chris Marsh and Beth Climo here in Washington, D.C., and all the way from Casablanca in Morocco, the consular chief there, Ryan Palzrock. So I want to turn it over to them. Throughout the presentation that they're going to give you, you will learn more about what Das King talked about in terms of our travel advisories. You'll learn more about what we can and can't do, a little bit more about what we can do in instances of challenges and times of crisis. And we want you to come away from this with resources. So throughout, you'll also have in the chat, you'll see that we will drop important links in there for you to have moving forward. I want to thank our colleagues in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs and World Learning for their partnership here. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the panel. I will say that we're going to go through the presentation that they have, and then we will have a robust question and answer session following their presentation. So please do feel free if you have questions. We know that many questions were submitted ahead of time, and we're really grateful for that. But as the presentation happens, if something pops into your mind, please do ask that, and we'll do our best to get to those questions and get you answers. So I think we're gonna start with Chris, but Chris, Beth, Ryan, thank you all very much. Ryan especially, because I think it's your equivalent of the weekend there. You're up and it's like your Friday night. So I don't know that you have work tomorrow, but thank you all very much for being here. And I'll turn it over to the panel.
Thank you, Dan, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Marsh, and I am a consular officer and a civil servant at the Department of State in the Office of Overseas Citizen Services. I cover several countries in North Africa and Saudi Arabia in my portfolio, but I'm the team lead for the Consular Information Program, which is primarily responsible for travel advisories.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Beth Climo. Like Chris, I'm part of the civil service working here in the Bureau of Consular Affairs in Washington, D.C. Being part of the civil service generally means that folks like Chris and I work domestically. We stay in jobs usually for many years, which means that we usually end up being subject matter and policy experts. And part of our role is to advise our colleagues overseas, like Ryan, on policy implementation and policy priorities. I also cover a handful of posts in the Middle East and North Africa, one of which is Morocco. So Ryan is often on the receiving end of my guidance.
And hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Palzrock. I'm the chief of the consular section for the U.S. mission to Morocco. And yes, I get wonderful guidance from Beth on a daily basis. I'm in the foreign service, but even whether it's civil service or foreign service, Washington or overseas, we're in touch with each other every day. And that's an important thing for you to understand and for your students to understand. Whether you call Overseas Citizen Services in Washington if there was something impacting one of your students, or whether you call an embassy or consulate, we're in touch with each other because we really are one team. I've been with the State Department since 2004 and have served as a consul in China, in the Dominican Republic, and I ran the New York Passport Agency for 3 years. So we move around every few years as foreign service officers, as consular officers. One of the things that I wanted to mention is what does a consular section do overseas? Our number one priority, of course, is the protection of American citizen services and providing information to them. We provide routine services such as passports and notaries. If one of your students loses a passport or needs to get it renewed, we're here for that. We also provide emergency services such as the repatriations of U.S. citizens that we did over the past year. We also issue visas. So here in Morocco, I oversee not only American Citizen Services, but the issuance of all visas to Moroccan citizens to travel to the United States as a tourist or as a student or as a diplomat or in whatever capacity.
So what is our primary goal with our messaging? We want to provide accurate and timely information to U.S. citizens about safety and security threats overseas. We want people to read our products and walk away with information to help you make decisions on where and how to safely travel, live, work, and study abroad. We're constantly honing our messages to keep them up to date and easy to understand. One way we do this is by writing our products in straightforward, plain language without using jargon or complex terms that might be a little too academic in nature. We're analyzing a great deal of data and distilling it down into some of the most salient points about safety and security when you're traveling abroad. We really want, and we're leaning heavily on the expertise of our embassies and consulates in the field to create a clear and accessible product. In general, we're making our information easy to find and easy to understand and easy to use.
And while, for the next slide, while travel advisories might be our most visible product, they're not our only source of information. And depending on what you need to know, you might need to look at one of our other products in order to find the information you're looking for. For example, alerts are sent by our embassies and consulates overseas. We produce we produce these for specific events, maybe to warn about a demonstration or an approaching hurricane, or even, as we saw a lot last year, evacuation flights leaving the country. For an overview of general conditions in the country, anything from what's the health system like, or what are unusual laws I should know about, or where are the areas where all the pickpockets hang out in town. For those kinds of things, you'll want to look at our country pages that are really a one-stop shop for all of that kind of information. And we also have a new product that we rolled out last year, which is the COVID-19 information pages on each embassy and consulate website. We'll have more details about this later. Ryan and I will talk about this further, but that is really the main source of information where you're going to find details about the impact of COVID-19 in any given country. But regardless of the product, they are all standardized format worldwide. We want them to be easy to navigate so that if you're looking at the information for Canada or for Japan, you're going to be able to locate that critical info because the format, the look and feel is all the same. All right. Next slide.
So as Beth mentioned, our country pages are kind of a one-stop shop, a landing page, if you will, for all the available accessible information for any given country. There's a country page for every country and a corresponding travel advisory, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. One thing I wanted to flag, though, is that our products are not meant to be looked at once and then kind of forgotten or stepped away from. We want you to interact with our products as much as possible. As Deputy Assistant Secretary King said, this is a dynamic and changing time. We want you to interact with this data and these products multiple times while you're planning trips, programs, or whatever it may be. The data will change a lot, as will our advice, as we consistently and constantly re-hone how we look at things to give you the best possible message to keep you safe abroad. Our products are widely accessible on mobile platforms, and the intent behind that is to make sure that you can use them while on the go, while traveling, as reference tools when you are overseas or as you are planning your trips. The other thing I wanted to mention is travel.state.gov specifically. This is where you're going to be able to find all of our information linked to in a really convenient area, a really convenient space. It's the primary website we use. However, it's not the only website we use. Each individual consulate and embassy has their own website as well, and there's some country-specific information you should check there for. Beth mentioned the COVID information pages. Those will be housed specifically on the embassy web pages, and so you will have to do a little switching back and forth to make sure you're getting a complete picture of all the information we have out there. Next slide, please.
I really like including this slide in all of our presentations we do because I think it provides a visual of what Das King alluded to during her remarks. And that is that at this time, the State Department is advising that any non-essential travel be deferred at this time. And this is a visual representation of that. This is a color-coded map illustrating the levels of countries' travel advisories worldwide. You can find this map yourself on travel.state.gov. And I think looking at this, you can see that the vast majority of the world is at either a level 3, that's the orange color you see, or a level 4, red, do not travel. So this is just a visual representation of the realities of international travel right now. As Das King said, it's not ideal, and we hope that this can change in the coming months. But this is an easy way if you wanted to go check out this worldwide map yourself. It's an easy way to get a worldwide view of trends in travel safety. And also, if you click on each individual country from this worldwide map, you'll be taken directly to that country's individual country page with all the information that we've referred to. Next slide.
So we're going to drill down a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what make up a travel advisory now, and hopefully peel back the curtain as to how a travel advisory is made, because I know there are a lot of questions about that. Hopefully you're familiar with the slide that you're seeing now. This is a mock-up page of what a travel advisory would look like on travel.state.gov. And I'm going to run through some of the basic elements because I think they're very important to understanding how to use a travel advisory, how it might change, and just the basic principles behind how we're trying to keep people informed and educated about safety and security overseas. Perhaps most prominently and intentionally, you see the travel advisory level at the top. For the example here, I believe it's a level 2. It says exercise increased caution. It's very important that you don't stop at just reading the level or looking at the color of a travel advisory, although that is the intent, to take a quick look and broadly understand the threat level of overall of a country. But I want to read through what the words corresponding to levels are because I think they're equally as important. A level 1 means exercise normal precautions. It doesn't mean exercise the kinds of precautions you would exercise on a day-to-day basis at your home in the United States. It means exercise normal precautions when you're traveling abroad. That may mean a host of different things for different people when they're planning their trip. Level 2 is exercise increased caution. There is a risk indicator that from our perspective, and I'll talk a little more about risk indicators in a second, that is elevated to the point where you need to increase the level of caution and planning when you're planning a trip. A level 3 means reconsider travel. Very plainly, we want you to really think hard about going to this location, and if it's not essential, probably forego your trip. Level 4, do not travel. Hopefully that's pretty clear, but you know, some people might not understand that messaging. From our perspective, the advice on a level 4 country is do not travel. It's too dangerous. I want to drill a little bit deeper down into the risk indicators now. So every travel advisory examines all of the risk indicators that you're looking at right now through rubrics, which we'll talk about in just a second. But all of these risk indicators are very important to give a complete picture of the threat landscape in the country. So we have crime, terrorism, civil unrest, health, natural disasters, time-limited events, and that's like a political election or a large sporting event like the World Cup. Kidnapping or hostage-taking issues, and other. Other, it represents things like armed conflict or active landmine zones or things that we can't capture in a larger risk indicator group. On the next slide, we're going to do a deeper dive to understand the way that we look at these risk indicators to create the travel advisory and come to an overall level. So next slide, please. So how do we determine a travel advisory? We use rubrics. Rubrics look at different data points that are specific to those risk indicators. They will correspond to levels 1 through 4, depending on the severity of the data point for a given country. We'll look at multiple data points and kind of determine where a country shakes out based on where the different data points line up for a country. We will conduct a full review of every travel advisory every 6 or 12 months, depending on the level of the overall travel advisory. So for level 1s and 2s, we'll conduct that full review every 12 months. For 3s and 4s, we'll conduct that review every 6 months. This doesn't mean that we're not looking and monitoring at the situation on the ground daily sometimes. It means that this is when we do the full review just to make sure everything is as it should be, all of our points are accurate, we don't need to change the language or the overall level. But as COVID has shown us, we have really appreciated the nimbleness of our products to change them on a daily, weekly, monthly basis as the situation dictates. All of these facets help to ensure that the overall travel advisory is accurate, timely, and consistent. We're going for a worldwide standard. So the travel advisory that you're going to look at in Morocco is going to be very similar to the one you look at in Canada in terms of its structure. We want you to be able to compare and contrast, to easily find the same kind of information across different countries, and more importantly, just be familiar with the general products that we have out there. I'm going to detail crime just a little bit because I think having an actual example will be useful, but I want to illustrate specifically when we talk about assessing a rubric, what we mean. So when we're looking at crime specifically, we're not looking at pickpocketing, we're not looking at non-violent crime or scams or anything like that. We're looking at violent crime. The travel advisory is meant to talk mostly about risks to life and limb. So we look at the homicide rate as one of the data points, and we're also looking at more conglomerated statistics that we get from both within the department and outside the department. You might be familiar with OSAC, the Overseas Security Advisory Council. They have a publicly available statistic, a report on crime and safety statistics. We're looking very closely at that. We're also looking very closely at reports that diplomatic security within the State Department, what they create and what they push out to us that we can use to help make our assessment. That kind of report is not publicly available, and that's one of the reasons why rubrics are not publicly available. Now, just to illustrate the point a bit more, I want to turn it over to Ryan so he can talk more specifically about Morocco's travel advisory.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I just want to underscore a couple points that both Das King made and Chris made. One is that the decision really is based entirely on data, and it's data that's coming from a lot of different places, including us at embassies and consulates overseas. So we are constantly tracking and monitoring reports of violent crime, for example, and we're updating our colleagues in Washington with the data that we collect. There's an important program that every embassy and consulate has that you should know about called the Duty Officer Program. We are available 24/7, 365 days a year in cases of emergency to help U.S. citizens. So there's colleagues at the embassy. We serve overnight. They will answer the phone at 3 a.m. if there's an emergency. And they write up duty reports. And they're also keeping track of statistics through our duty officer program of calls that come in regarding crimes and other sorts of things. So I mentioned the duty officer programs. You can let your students know about it as well, that if they're in trouble on a weekend or even in the middle of the night, there's someone at the embassy who will answer the phone call to be able to help them out. But it also factors into our travel advisories, and it helps us accumulate the data that we need. In terms of Morocco, the other thing I wanted to underscore is, as Deputy Assistant Secretary King said, the decision about what level to put a country is not political in any way. Countries can not be happy with us when we raise the level, as what happened in Morocco in the spring of 2019 following a terrorist attack on a couple Western tourists who are visiting Morocco. It was raised from level 1 to 2, and it's a decision that's made by our bureau, Consular Affairs, completely independent of politics or what the host nation would think about it. We look only at the safety and security of U.S. citizens as we make this very important decision. With COVID, now it's been raised, another level higher, and so it's at Reconsider Travel right now.
And if we go to the next slide, we'll actually see Morocco's current travel advisory. Oops, sorry. I thought it was going to be Morocco's, but anyway, related to Morocco's travel advisory, as Ryan alluded to, it is currently a level 3, had previously been a level 2. And in this example with Canada in the before times, as we call it, often was a level 1. And as in many of our travel advisories, almost all of them, the major driving factor right now is the impact of COVID-19. And we have a dedicated rubric specifically for COVID and the impact of COVID-19 on any given country. So as Chris was talking about the different rubrics we use for crime, et cetera, we have a separate rubric detailing the COVID risks. One of the factors that we look at in our COVID rubric is the CDC travel health notice level. And you'll see that we also make sure to mention the CDC travel health notice level in the text of our advisory. This is, for us, a very obvious thing. CDC are the public health experts, and they are the ones who are going to have the most up-to-date data and analysis on the health impacts of COVID, such as disease prevalence, hospitalization rates, things of that nature. And in addition to the CDC travel health notice level, other aspects of our COVID rubric include logistical impacts, that the COVID crisis is having on international travel. And this is related to border closures and availability of essential services like grocery stores or public transportation, things like that. And also stay-at-home orders, that kind of thing. So it's a variety of factors that go into our COVID rubric. And, you know, like I said, like in this example in Canada and in the Morocco example, the COVID crisis is really what's driving a lot of our travel advisories right now. And the other issues are kind of, you know, status quo, or at least they're not contributing to the raising of the advisories, whereas COVID more is, we're seeing is resulting in more escalation of travel advisories rather than de-escalation. And so if we could go to the next slide, you'll notice in the travel advisory, it's not very long. That's by design. There's not a lot of detail. Again, that's by design in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on a country. Rather, as we've talked about, every embassy has a COVID information page on their website. Again, this is where you're going to find all of the information that you could possibly need or want about the impacts of COVID-19 in a given country. We made the decision to kind of house this information separately from the travel advisories, just because there's such a depth and breadth of information that travelers need and want on this issue. And if it were included in the travel advisories, it would probably get much too unwieldy and you know, make the travel advisories more difficult to navigate. So every embassy puts this information on their webpage. It's still in a standard format across all 200 plus embassies and consulates around the world. So, you know, you should be able to navigate quickly among the pages and find the information that you need. And Ryan, if you could, as the owner of one of these pages, talk a little bit about the kinds of information that we find on there, how often they're updated, where you get your information, things like that.
Absolutely. So first of all, they're really easy to find, the COVID-19 information page that every embassy has. So you can just Google U.S. Embassy Rabat, which is here in Morocco, or today I was actually looking at other embassies in the region, at U.S. Embassy in Algiers, Algeria, in Tunis, Tunisia. I looked at the embassy in Rome, in Spain, and every single embassy right on the main landing page had a link to the COVID-19 information page. So you just Google U.S. Embassy Rome, it'll be right there. You click on it, you see the landing page for Embassy Rome, and you'll see COVID-19 information, and you can click on it. And right on the top of the page, it says last updated, and it will, in the case of Morocco, we updated it today. Most posts are updating it just about on a daily basis as information changes. And it contains a lot of just absolutely critical information right now that you need to know about a country, if there's a country that you have a program in, or if that you're considering travel to. So for example, it is information about flights. Are there flights in or out of the country? In the case of Algiers, for example, in Algeria, the border are completely closed and there isn't flight. So, so you'll find information about what flights are there. So with Morocco, we talk about there are direct flights from Casablanca to New York, and there are flights on Air France to Paris. And so that's listed right there under flight information. It contains information about border closures, about entry requirements. Is a COVID test needed to enter the country right now? It contains information about quarantining. Does the host government require quarantining to happen? For example, I know just yesterday in the UK, they announced mandatory quarantines upon everyone who arrives in the UK. So it'll have information about that if you go to the US Embassy London's COVID-19 information page. It has information about testing, about where to get COVID testing, which with the new CDC requirements to enter the United States that you need a test now, beginning January 26, students can go there to find out where in the country they can get tested. So in the case of Morocco's COVID-19 information page, we actually list all the all the approved labs by the Moroccan Ministry of Health on the page, and so students can find where exactly to go. We say how much the test costs, which in Morocco is about $75, and we say how quickly you'll get the results, which here is about 24 hours, and they're emailed. So embassies provide very detailed information about where people can get tested right now, which will be really essential if folks are abroad and need to get back to the United States. It also, on the bottom, for those of you who also advise foreign students who are looking to come to the United States for a semester, on the very bottom, there's a section called Consular Services, and it details what visa services the embassy or consulate is currently providing in right now as well, because many consulates and embassies right now are not providing student visa services, as you probably know. We are here in Morocco, and so it mentions that on the bottom of the page. So the COVID-19 page is constantly updated, and it's just will provide a wealth of information in this time for you. Next slide, please. Wanted to talk a little bit about STEP, the Smart Travel Enrollment Program again, and also our travel alerts, which are related. So the Smart Travel Enrollment Program, as Das King mentioned, we can't emphasize enough how important it is. And you know, I've been reluctant when I've traveled as a tourist to other countries to sign up for it. I'm like, is it Big Brother or the government? It's not. As a person who uses it as a government official, we don't use it to figure out where Americans are in a country. We don't. It's there for us in an emergency. So I can give you some very specific examples. Back in 2006, when the State Department evacuated nearly 20,000 U.S. citizens from Lebanon, we were able to use those who had enrolled in the Smart Travel Enrollment Program. We had the addresses that they had provided, the physical addresses and phone numbers. We were able to call them and say, there's a convoy going by your house tomorrow, get in so we can get you out of the country. We were able to proactively reach out and connect with Americans so that they could get to safety. Here in Morocco, when we were one of the very first countries last March where the borders completely closed, and we found out we were able to do some repatriation flights, U.S. government chartered flights, but they were going to happen the very next day in Marrakesh. And we found out at 10 o'clock at night. So what did we do? We immediately sent a message to every U.S. citizen who had enrolled in the Smart Travel Enrollment Program saying, go to the airport in Marrakesh. There's going to be 9 planes leaving tomorrow beginning at noon. So from between March and Christmas in the last year, I know in Morocco, we did 36 health alerts through the Smart Travel Enrollment Program to U.S. citizens enrolled with us here in Morocco. And they contain information such as there's a new lockdown going tonight in Casablanca or in Marrakesh, or pharmacies have now opened up in this city, or there's a flight leaving next week, here's how you can get on it. Lots of very important, urgent, critical information, health alerts during this time. In non-COVID times, they're very important as well. As Das King mentioned, we might send out a travel alert if there's a natural disaster that's coming, a volcano eruption, an earthquake happened, or we know a hurricane is going to come in a couple days. We'll use the STEP program to be able to communicate critical information to people. We also, if there's political violence or if we hear about a demonstration that's going to happen, we'll send out alert through the Smart Travel Enrollment Program. Or if there's, here in Casablanca, we used to send them whenever there was going to be a soccer match there's 2 professional teams in Casa, and when they play each other, it can be a little rowdy. So we like to send out a security notice through the Smart Travel Enrollment Program. Finally, I wanted to mention a policy that when I first started working for the State Department as a Foreign Service officer, I had known about and I was really proud of. And that's called the No Double Standard Policy. And that means if we as the embassy, if I get any information about my security, so if our security office here at the embassy or consulate says, we're worried about your safety as U.S. government employees don't go to this part of the country, or this event's going to happen. And so I get any information pertaining to my own security. We're required under the no double standard policy to share that same information with private U.S. citizens. And so we get no information about our safety and security as U.S. government employees that we don't then also share the exact same information with private Americans who are in the country. And we do that through the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. It's required of us, and it's an obligation that we take very faithfully and very seriously to share the information that we receive. Next slide, please. So just to recap some of the resources that we've discussed today, we've talked about the website travel.state.gov, which has all of the country information. So it's got information about every country in the world on there. It's also passport information, where to apply for a passport and how to renew, but it has all of our travel advisories are listed on there. So we have travel.state.gov. You can enroll through STEP through travel.state.gov as well. Separately, we have all the embassy and consulate web pages, which contain right now critically the COVID-19 information page, which you'll see linked to directly from the homepage of each embassy or consulate. Finally, we mentioned the Overseas Security Council, which is a private-public partnership that taps into a lot of the international business community and information that they're receiving about how to keep their employees safe abroad. So we encourage you to explore OSAC, the Overseas Security Advisory Council webpage if you haven't. And of course, ECA has some wonderful resources and websites as well. I think there was a question earlier that I saw that I wanted to answer about how do we find the duty officer phone number or get the American Citizen Services phone number. That would be on every embassy and consulate's website as well. So if you go to the U.S. Embassy in Morocco, there's tabs along the top, just like every embassy has, and one of the tabs is U.S. Citizen Services. And if you scroll right over that, phone numbers will pop up, including our business hours numbers to call, and then as well as the duty officer after hours number. So that's where you can find that particular number. Finally, the last thing I wanted to mention about STEP is you can enroll all your students. There's a way that you can do a batch enrollment and enroll a whole group of people. So if you're not convinced your students will enroll themselves, you can do it for them. And with that, I think that's the end of our main presentation, and we have some questions that I think we're gonna answer, but I'll turn it over to our moderator, Dan.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Beth. That's fabulous. I am so proud to have you as colleagues and to be counted among you. And I really appreciate that the time that you take, the thoroughness of the presentation that you gave. And I hope that the audience and I feel they are going to get a lot out of it. They have already. We're going to move now to a Q&A. We have received a bunch of questions ahead of time, which I think are great, but we also got some really great questions during the presentation, and I'd like to get to those. I will kind of, I'll pitch it over. If you as the panelists feel one of you is more equipped to answer, if I pitch it to somebody, just feel free to pass it along. But we'll get started right away with a couple of questions that we have. Some of these have been answered, and so if you feel like we've covered it, we can move on to the next really good question. I just wanted to start with Chris, and just if you would sort of reiterate or go back to the idea of a question that what effect does politics or diplomatic issues or changes in administration have on determining or changing travel advisory levels? I think this has been answered, but I want to just give you another quick crack at it.
Yeah, and the answer is very little. In order to provide the best kind of information to keep U.S. citizens safe, which is our mandate, it has to be fact-based. We have to arm U.S. citizens with the right kind of information so they can make informed decisions about their own safety. The only other quick thing I'll say about this is, the diplomatic efforts don't negatively influence this, but I do think there's always an opportunity when we see something in a country that necessitates us raising a travel advisor to have a conversation with that country and to diplomatically engage them. And just like we did with Morocco, as Ryan was discussing on terrorism issues before, and letting them know, hey, here's what we're seeing. Here's why we're raising it. And I think that that opens a dialogue and both gives that host country government a chance to find out if there's a way to mitigate that threat. But most importantly, it lets them know that the most important priority for the Department of State is to keep U.S. citizens safe.
Thanks, Chris. Next question will go over to Beth, and it's a little bit more on the CDC side of this. There's been a lot of talk about COVID-19, understandably, throughout this, and Ryan's sort of detail as to what information is out there and the detail that you guys have provided is fantastic. But Beth, if you could talk about how you work with CDC to develop our travel advisories and other messages regarding safety and security, especially during this pandemic. But you can speak specifically about COVID-19, but generally because CDC, we know, is so important in terms of their view of the world as well.
Sure. CDC has always been a great partner of ours here at Consular Affairs on health messaging. And this partnership has only grown stronger throughout the pandemic. I'm part of the health team here in my office, and we liaise with CDC. We have calls on a weekly basis with them to share any developments on messaging that they have. And then we, in turn, share any developments we have on our end. One concrete example of the closeness of our relationship is that CDC has traditionally had a 3-tiered system for their travel health notices. So their travel health notices are level 1, 2, 3, whereas ours has, since we made this change over a few years ago, is on a 4-tiered system. So with the COVID crisis, CDC actually created a 4-tiered system specifically for COVID, the COVID travel risk. And that was done explicitly to match up with our levels at the State Department. So that's just one example of how much we sync up with them and how it's a constant sharing of information. Like I mentioned in the presentation, they are the public health experts in terms of any medical health data that we're going to be using in our evaluations for our advisories. Our advisories won't always be exactly the same. So there might be some instances where you'll see a level 1 CDC advisory for COVID, and yet the State Department's level is level 3 or 4. And that's because our advisories take into account not just the health data like disease prevalence, incidence rate, hospitalization rate. We look at more than that. We have a broader picture of the travel environment. Like I said, we're also looking at border closures, stay-at-home orders, transportation availability, things like that. So, you're looking at a country, maybe a level 1 or 2 in CDC's travel health notice, but maybe that's because their borders are closed and you can't actually go there. And so then our advisory will have to be adjusted to account for those other logistical issues. But like I said, our partnership is strong. There's a constant sharing of information. We synchronize the updates to our travel advisories along with theirs on a pretty much weekly basis. And it's really a pleasure to work with them.
Thanks a ton, Beth. And then Ryan, I'm going to come to you. And this question is more about sort of messaging. Can you describe or go into a little bit more detail about the ways that maybe COVID-19 and the pandemic have changed, how and what you message to U.S. citizens?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that really underscored for us is just need to provide information using as many methods as we possibly could. So when we were doing all these repatriation flights here in Morocco, and we repatriated 3,000 Americans back to the United States during the time of COVID, we would not only send a message through the Smart Travel Enrollment Program, but we would tweet about it. We'd put it up on social media. There were Facebook groups of U.S. citizens stranded in Morocco that we were on and trying to reply to information about. We would get messages out through the local media. We also have at every embassy in the world, there's in each country, we have something called American Citizen Liaison Volunteers, who are leaders of the American community in that country. So it could be a study abroad director, the head of your program in a country, for example, might be an American Citizen Liaison Volunteer. So we'd also push information out to them, who in turn could provide the information to the groups of Americans that they represent. So for us during the time of COVID, I think it's been a reminder how critical it is that we have an ongoing dialogue with U.S. citizens in a country, and that we message about what's happening in as many ways as we possibly can to get the message out. So Twitter is another great resource for you. For embassies have Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts, and they're good to follow as well to get key information.
Thanks, Ryan. I think it's great. And I think with the way that we are getting information these days, everyone is carrying around a device that receives can receive all that information. So I think it's excellent advice and a really good perspective there. So we're getting flooded with questions, so I'm going to do my best to start just pitching these out to you guys. This is one that came in pretty early, and I think it's actually pretty good. It's a bit hypothetical, but it's asking for your opinions. As we look towards academic year 21-22 and start to plan for global program offerings, what destinations does the panel foresee would offer higher probability for us to send students to? I don't know if you guys consider it a trick question, but it's a good question. I think it's on the minds of a lot of the panelists, or sorry, the participants here. So whoever wants to start with that, Chris, I could go with you, or whoever on the panel.
I'm happy to take a crack at it, though I think my answer is going to be pretty disappointing. I don't think I could give specifically because I'm going to reemphasize another one of the points that we made earlier, which is how dynamic things are. I don't think in February or March of this past year, we would have been able to foresee us in the situation we are now. And I certainly don't think we could talk about individual countries 3, 6, 9, even 12 months from now. I mean, while I think there's a lot of vaccination campaigns going on and a lot of other great initiatives that we're taking, like the new CDC order to do pre-departure testing, we're not really sure where this pandemic is going to be in the next year or so. So I think I'll leave it there.
I think that's fair, Chris, and I think we'll move to another question. I think I mean, it's hard, it's speculative, but it is on people's minds. I would remind people that as things change, as things start to develop and change, go back to our resources, the resources that we talked about here, the country pages, travel.state.gov, look at the embassy pages, because we will update those. And I think there's one message that has come through loud and clear in this presentation is how seriously we take the information that we're providing and our obligation to do so, but also how often we are looking at it and examining it. And so a quick question, and this is probably over to you, Chris, as well. The question is, are countries' levels being reassessed more often to COVID? And I think you touched on this, but if you could talk a little bit about that. So if a country is at where they're getting assessed every 6 to 12 months, does it mean if something changes, this is what this question is asking, that you're going to have to wait, it's going to have to wait in that cycle?
If we see a change in the security landscape for a country, we change the travel advisory as quickly as possible. So yes, we are looking at travel advisories more frequently with a specific eye to COVID because we know how dynamic that threat is. But I would say even before COVID, if there was an issue that a consulate or an embassy flagged for us that represented a longer term, more enduring threat to U.S. citizens, we would change that on the travel advisory as quickly as 24 hours knowing about that threat. In the meantime, we might send out an alert to warn folks about it as well. But we're always looking at things, and just the sheer presence of our embassies and consulates abroad, the number of people we have looking at these issues allow us to really be nimble with this information and post updates quickly.
Okay, excellent. Thank you on that, Chris. This is for anybody. How does the Department of State define non-essential travel?
I can take a swing at that. I don't know that there is a very specific definition of what that is. And a lot of this is look, there's so much uncertainty right now, and a lot of these decisions are just deeply personal decisions about whether it's safe to go somewhere, and is it safer to be in the US or it's safer to be in X country. And it involves looking at the healthcare systems of that country. It involves the network of support that someone might have in a country. And what is essential to one person might not be is essential to another person. So I think you're not going to hear from us saying you should or you must absolutely do this or absolutely don't do this. We're strongly advising right now to reconsider all non-essential travel, and I think that message needs to be heard. But it is deeply personal for each person, and so we try and provide the best facts about the ground in each country, so that each individual traveler and program can make informed decisions.
Chris or Beth, do you have anything to add? I think, Ryan, that's great. I mean, there's no sort of simple answers to some of these questions, but we want to pose them because it's an important conversation. But Beth or Chris, would you add anything there?
I certainly think Ryan, I really wouldn't add too much to Ryan, except just to say that context really matters. And right now, essential travel might mean something a bit more, it might be a tougher bar to get over than it would be pre-COVID days, just because of the uncertainty in the world.
Fair enough. So we'll move on then. I'm seeing a lot of questions on STEP. I'm going to highlight one question. And again, I'm not throwing you softballs here, so hopefully people get that. This question comes in. It says, we have international students on our study abroad programs. My understanding of enrolling STEP is that it's only U.S. citizens that can enroll, and international students aren't eligible. Is this true? The sort of appended to that is, can the U.S. Embassy support international students abroad on U.S. higher ed study abroad programs? So it's a two-part question, and happy for you guys to handle it in any way that you want.
I can handle that. Foreign citizens can enroll in STEP to get information. I know a lot of journalists here in Morocco, for example, have signed up to receive our information. It's intended to be for U.S. citizens. That's its main audience, and it's for Americans, but others can sign up for it through the system. We obviously care about all of your students who are part of your programs, even if they're not U.S. citizens, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be able to get services that we offer. So, for example, when we were doing repatriations back to the United States here in Morocco, unfortunately, college students who are U.S. college students enrolled in U.S. universities, but who weren't American citizens, weren't eligible to get in our repatriation flights. And that was in part because of host government requirements. It was due to limited space. And so even though they might be with the same program, and we do respect that and we care about them, we're not always able to help them like we would be your U.S. students.
Thanks, Ryan. And again, I think that you chalk that up to we need to give people the honest information, the honest response, as much as we might want to help in every situation and every student. I think this is a question for Beth, and it really has to do with more on the vaccine side and sort of looking forward. And I think it's a good question. The question comes in, it says, in the COVID-19 era, are you planning to consider COVID-19 vaccine numbers, maybe rates, to determine travel advisories? So for example, the country is at 50 or 75% of its population. Will that impact its its travel advisory rate? I mean, again, this is a little bit of a crystal ball, but Beth, what do you think of that?
So it's an interesting thought. I think any impact that vaccination rates would have on our travel advisories would be rolled up. That data point would maybe, depending on what CDC thinks, be rolled up into CDC's assessment, which then feeds into ours. So if that is a data point that CDC thinks is valuable down the road, and they roll it into their assessment, that's how it would factor into ours. I don't really see us using that statistic factoring directly into our advisories because it's more on the health medical side. And in all of those kinds of issues, we would defer to CDC's opinion and expertise on that. So if it was something that they were not going to include in their own travel health notice products, I don't think we independently would be using that in our assessments.
Thanks, Beth.
Dan, could I just make one quick point based on some of the other questions I'm seeing?
Sure, Chris. Yeah,
So I'm seeing a couple questions that just ask about, what's the difference between a 3 and a 4 in the COVID era? And I think that's a really good place to kind of take some of this conversation, because I want to reemphasize a point that Beth made earlier. CDC are the public health experts. They're looking at the epidemiology, the transmission rates, the case counts, as well as healthcare infrastructure in a country for this virus. That's a little bit different than what we traditionally look at, and it's not really our expertise at the State Department. So we defer heavily to them on their assessments when it comes to setting a travel advisory level. That's one of our major data points that we're looking at. So what the CDC says is really going to guide a lot of our analysis. That being said, we're also looking at the overlay of infrastructure issues that could be causing the country, border closures. As Deputy Assistant Secretary King noted earlier, we just underwent the largest repatriation effort the State Department has ever gone through. And so that is at the forefront of our mind. We don't overseas. So availability of transportation out as well. And when we're seeing a confluence of the CDC saying the virus is bad, the health infrastructure can't support us, now we're looking at testing capacity as well to make sure folks can get home to countries. And when we're seeing that run into these infrastructure, border closures, kinds of things, that's going to make the difference for a level 4 country right now.
Chris, that's phenomenal. I think we have maybe 3 or 4 minutes left for questions before we wrap up. And there are a ton of questions here. So, I'm not going to pledge any extra work on behalf of any of my consular colleagues or my ECA colleagues, but I will say that I know these colleagues of mine, and as many of these questions that we can take and then send, after this session, send out, sort of an FAQ, let's say, that hopefully we can do that because we don't have time to get to everybody's questions. So I do apologize on that. Here's an easy one. I think I'm going to pitch this to Ryan really quickly, and you can remind us. Somebody asked, where can we find the number of the duty officer for each country? This is very nuts and bolts. How do we find that?
So this is good because I only have 3 to 4 minutes before my iPhone battery is going to die. But all of the phone numbers are on the embassy web pages. Some embassies will just say, here's the duty officer number. Other embassies will say, here's the after hours emergency number. And then you can call that and you'll speak to an operator and could ask if it's pertaining to the safety of an American to speak to the duty officer. Depends on how many Americans visit a country. So if it's a country that only has, not that many American visitors, they'll probably just put the duty officer number directly there. If it's a country like my last post, the Dominican Republic, where there's millions of Americans that go every year, there's an operator that the number goes to after hours that then triages and can send the call to the duty officer. But you'll see right in the U.S. Citizen Services tab on every embassy webpage the emergency after hours number. But if you can call during business hours, that's even better.
That's excellent advice. And pre-COVID, I was working to share consular information with the travel industry at travel trade shows. And members of the public, my advice to them was, if you know you're going to 3 different countries, find out where the U.S. Embassy is, put the address and your phone number, put the phone number of the embassy there. In case you ever need it, it's right there. You don't have to find it in the moment that you have an emergency. So, sorry, let me go to a question that has to do with, let me see, I saw it, sorry, I lost it for a second. Is there a way to check the history of travel advisors for a country pre-COVID? So I think, and I don't want to jump into the head here, but this is maybe someone saying, okay, if we get COVID under control, can we expect that we would go back to a 1 or 2 if all other things remain the same? That's at least my take on it. So that's open to any one of you guys.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand that. So, well, could you just repeat that one more time?
So it looks like to me that it's basically asking, is there a historical record of what countries, what their travel advisories were versus, let's say, what they might be now, especially given they're all suffering, or we're all suffering from COVID in one way or another?
Yeah, I can take that. So we don't keep a historical record of the ups and downs of travel advisories. I would imagine there's a way to do that through various internet platforms, but that's not something the State Department tracks or makes public. I think the reason we don't do it is because we want people to focus on the here and now, and not necessarily on the flow of how things have gone up and down. As I mentioned before too, we're constantly refining the analyses that we use and the data we use to understand different threats. And so we wouldn't want to put people kind of off the scent of the current guidance by putting out previous guidance.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that. We're reaching the end. I wish we could go on for hours and hours. I'm the kind of person that if I give a presentation, I stay until the last person has the last question. Unfortunately, I don't know that we can do that today. What I would like to do is I'd like to thank each of the panel members, and I'd like to pitch it to each of you for sort of your last thoughts. I know the audience they are people that facilitate the future of America in terms of our understanding, our engagement with the world. So, tell me or tell the audience a little bit about your own, maybe a tiny bit about your own travel, your study abroad, how that impacted your career, and then give us your final thoughts, what you want people to take away from this. So in any order that you'd like.
Ryan, do you want to go first since your phone's going to die?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, I want everyone to hear, to understand and know how much we really value study abroad. We view you as partners. You're doing the work that we're doing, trying to keep the university students safe overseas. And so thank you for all of your hard work. We enjoy working with you. And I think us supporting study abroad for us is some of the most meaningful and important work that we do. And so we're here to support you and your programs and your students. Most of us did go abroad in college. I did a program in India, and I think it changed our lives. And so we know how important it is. And so thank you for all the great work you each are doing.
I'll go next.
Chris or Beth? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I am here at the State Department as a direct result of a study abroad experience I had in 2005. I went to Spain. I was 20 years old. That was my first passport. That was my first time out of the country. And it really ignited for me a love of the world, a love of different cultures, a passion for travel. And so I appreciate what you do. And I hope that in all of us panelists here, you kind of see what your students and the next generation that you're advising, you see the next generation of State Department, Foreign Service officers and civil service experts. Thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to spend a good chunk of my undergraduate experience abroad in China for about 8 months. And I think looking back now that I have the position I have now, I'm grateful for two big things. One was just the unfettered access that the program allowed me to, the people and the places that I don't think I'll ever have access to again. It was just incredible. And so the programs are so valuable. The second thing I have a great appreciation for is how much time and planning I know must have gone into those programs for the sheer sake of keeping us safe. The kind of research that must have gone into it, staying on top of safety and security issues and things like that. And so I know that landscape has only gotten more challenging in the past, 15 years since I was studying abroad. So I appreciate that you all are keeping these programs alive, robust, and safe, keeping your students safe. And as a parent of two kids, hoping that they have a chance to enjoy these programs one day, really just appreciative of that. So thank you.
And I think that's about it. I will close with, I hope people understand that we are here serving you, that your safety and the safety of your students when they're studying abroad is primary to our mission. We will continue to do that. I will hope people also take away that there is a ton of information. We are conditioned these days to scroll past and to try to get information very quickly. I know our students are. I have 2 in college, so I know it. But the information that we put together is robust, it's thorough, it's authoritative, and it's always going to be there. And it's worth investing time to find it and to bookmark these pages when you're doing that. I studied abroad a long time ago at the University of Aleppo in Syria, and it is the reason I think that I decided to pursue a career in the Foreign Service. It's life-changing. I mean, there's no other way to put it. So I would add my thanks, my sincere thanks to each of you out there who are doing this and facilitating this. And as Anthony talked about in his opening, the Secretary of State recognizes the importance of Americans seeing the world and being out amongst the rest of the world for a future. I know we look for future diplomats to join our ranks and State Department employees to do that. But we thank our colleagues at ECA. We want to thank, again, Anthony, and we want to thank Deputy Assistant Secretary King, colleagues at Consular Affairs, and then World Learning, our ECA partner that is helping to put these events together. I will plug there's a March event webinar on March 25th, same time. If you're old as me, you would say same bat time, same bat channel. It's from 1 to 2:15, and that will be focused on what the embassy abroad or embassies and consulates can and can't do for American citizens in times of crisis. So we hope that each of you will join us then. In the meantime, we hope that you stay safe, that your families are safe, that you are well, and we appreciate you spending time with us today. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.